Okay guys, I got you on the the GoPro now. So one of the things that you want to start doing is that you want to go ahead and start disassembling the transfer case here. And one of the things that you need to do is get yourself a flathead screwdriver and pry these clips apart. They can come off pretty easily. And just set them aside. Take off the boot. You're not going to be reusing any of those things. The other thing I have already started to do is I've started to loosen up some of these bolts with an impact. You're going to need a 10 millimeter, a 15 millimeter, and a 13 millimeter. And the reason that I started to do this with an impact was because when I try to apply some force, the whole transfer case would try to rotate, as opposed to just hit it with the impact, just loosen them up, and you can start going from there. Now, one of the ones that I did notice was different was this one bolt at the very top. This is a 12 point, 10 millimeter. It has to be a 12 point. Now, I did start to have some problems with this one because it sticks out so much more than the others. That this area right here, the part that was exposed, was corroded and was starting to damage the threads as I was trying to pull it out. So I had to get myself a small little hand hacksaw and start slowly cutting at the threads and slowly working it around, cutting some more in between the threads until I was able to pull it out by hand slowly. I have already cleaned out that one hole and vacuumed it. One of the things that I want to keep doing here is keeping the work area clean. I don't think I'll be reusing this one right now. So one of the things is that I want to do is I want to replace this bolt. And I found that this bolt is a 10, it's a metric 10 1.5. Coincidentally, I have also noticed that the bolts that go onto the sway bar and other areas, the body that hold up the let's say the bumper brackets onto the body of the unibody, are also a metric 10 with a 1.5 thread, and they're also just about the same length. And this is also these are all a 15 millimeter. They come off with a 15 millimeter wrench, and this also comes in with a 15 millimeter hex head. The things that the first thing, like we were talking about, this is the first thing that needs to come off. The second thing that needs to start coming off is this a speedometer sensor. If we don't take it out, this is gonna break. It is somewhat important to remember the orientation of this. Speedometer gear sensor. This goes to the side. This will be reused in the new transfer case housing. And so will this fork and bolt that will also be reused. The things that we need to do is start taking this seal out of here.
some of the retainer rings that are not going to be used anymore. This spring-like thing was just part of the outer output shaft seal. So you won't be able to see it from that angle. But here we got to note something before we take off this this housing right here. This right here has to be about an inch from here to here. Now this is not a problem with the newer transfer cases. I believe it was the 96 or 97 plus, or this newer style of NP231 that had this boot, and not that hard casing, aluminum casing all around that had this. This is shorter as opposed to the older transfer cases where this is longer. This needs to be shaved down to about 1 inch. More or less, before we put in the new housing, because the new housing has about the same height as this, so this will fit fine. This is for, I believe it was like the vacuum actuator on the older transfer cases. So once we have the seal and this cover and the boot off, now we have access to this housing right here. And these will be reused, so we keep them in a safe place. Now we have to separate this housing from the rest of this case. One of the things that when we pull this housing off is that the oil pump for the transfer case is going to be right behind it. Just got to make sure that we are able to catch it. Should be a retainer ring in there. See these pliers, this retainer ring pliers make a difference. Now we can pry the case. Gotta be mindful of that oil pump. retainer ring sits right here, right above that bearing. This is that shaft that every time you engage your 4x4, this one pops out. The pickup tube for this pump is right here. The O-ring is in here. And this needs to stay with the pickup tube. The next thing that needs to go is that back half of the transfer case housing. And these ones we said are 15 millimeter. This is the one that we're replacing with this one. These two are the ones that have washers on them. Now we need to separate this. We need to remove the yoke, the front output yoke. This comes out with a 1 1/8. It's better if you bring it out with an impact. This one needs to be tight. This case has pry points here. And over here. But for reference to the ones that have the two washers. And this comes up gently. That's where that pickup tube goes. That is the filter screen for the transfer case. We'll clean that up in a bit. Here you can see some of that old RTV. Here is a magnet. Does not look too terrible. We can clean that up as best as we can, and this could drop back in there. Now this is the meat and potatoes of this install right here. Move this up and out of the way. You're going to grab these two. Well, actually, you're going to check the chain, make sure it doesn't have any stretch in it. It doesn't move excessively. Now it doesn't have all of its tightness because the transfer case moves this way. But if you were to give it some tension, this does not move around, so we can say that this chain is good. We're going to grab our shafts here. I'm going to pull them straight up. And we're going to lay them down on our work table. This is a good time to inspect the rest of the transfer case. Doesn't look like any giant chunks in there. This front output bearing looks good. Doesn't have a whole lot of play in it. Now the part that we're going to change is this right here. This is the shaft that's going to be replaced with this new shaft. And it's going to go in this direction. All we need to do is we need to get this ring gear here and install it here on this shaft. Here you're going to have a ring, or a retainer ring I should say, right here under this ring gear assembly. This one's kind of a little bit hard to get it out. I'm pretty sure you guys saw those sparks. That comes apart as such. Now, one of the things is that the transfer cases before 1997, they had a needle cage bearing style in these here. Now that one has to be pressed out. You're going to need a special tool for that. In this case, this is a 99, so this does not have that needle cage, and this can be reinstalled into the new output shaft like so. If you're not sure, this ring gear wouldn't go that easily into the new shaft. So this takes a new retainer ring and slightly relieve some of the pressure so we can slide it as far down as we can. Readjust yourself. Watch your fingers when you're in here. This may need to be persuaded down. for you to tell that this ring gear sat in there properly, you will see these splines over that ring gear, or that snap ring, I should say. It's kind of hard to see, but there is that groove right there where this snap ring needs to go into. These splines will be over it. You'll be able to see them. This can go back into the chain. There are no more parts to this, so this can be brought back into the rest of the transfer case housing. And these threads are going to go to the back of the transfer case. This is your old ring. It's not going to be reused. And we're pretty much going to reassemble everything from here on out. Okay guys, one of the things that I did off camera was clean the back half of the transfer case. I used a soft brass bristle brush to get rid of that old silicone and RTV that was previously there on this surface, and as well as clean out this surface. I also used some brake clean to clean out the pickup tube for the transfer case pump. It goes over here. So now that we have our mating surfaces are clean, we can start the process of putting everything back together. Now, thing you do notice that I said that we used a soft brush, which is this up here. It's a small little 1-inch brush made out of brass, and the reason that you want to use something like that as opposed to using something like this is pretty much one of the biggest reasons is contamination. The second one, and probably more important than the first one, is that you're going to be marring up all these mating surfaces, and these mating surfaces are very important to keep your fluid in and contaminants out of the case. Aluminum is a very soft metal, and if you mar up, and these are very easy to mar up, so you can use something like a gasket scraper or a brush like this, and it should be okay. Pretty much, if you can do this whole job in less than a minute, you probably shouldn't do it. So we already have our rear output shaft in and our front output shaft in, and they're both in. Right now I measured out this shift rod that's here, and from this collar right here to this machine surface, it's about 2 inches more or less, just for a reference for you guys using the older transfer cases. That's the length that this 99 case has. Now the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to apply some RTV. Make sure you drop everything. We need to use a generous, or not so generous, that it may clog up a filter or the rest of the transfer case. just a small bevel, enough to get you around these surfaces. And I am using some black RTV. This one's oil resistant, and this one's just a gasket maker. We're going to apply the bead.
That looks pretty consistent. I can live with that. So the next thing that's gonna come is that we're gonna reapply our surface. Remember that this machine surface also needs to be clean and free from any gasket. There are some alignment dowels here. They go in two of these holes right across from each other, or on opposite sides. Being mindful that this pickup tube might want to fall out on you. You can just drop this in. This has to go into the bearing that's in here.
So this all gets sandwiched down. This shift rod protrudes through here.
We're going to start dropping in some of these bolts. Finger tight. Don't have to be anything tight right now. This does have to rest or set for about an hour before we start torquing anything down. We can apply a little bit of torque or wrench them down a little bit using a hand box wrench. The two with the washers go on where the dowels are at. Make sure you don't cross thread them. This one's having a little bit of trouble getting in there. Just gotta remember to be gentle with it. Be careful not to cross thread it.
It's a 15mm. Oh, we won't be able to get the ratchet wrench on there. Kind of like a star pattern. And inspect the pump. We're going to notice where our pickup tube is at, or our pickup orifice is at. gonna start aligning our pump. Alright, looks like that tube is securely in there. Doesn't look like it wants to pop out. So the next thing that we need to do is one, clean this new surface. Make sure you don't have any RTV again. This one's a clean surface. And we're going to be starting to reinstall our new rear housing. It's been about, I'll say 12-10 since this RTV was applied. Whenever we're done with this one is when we're gonna start the time again. This retainer ring is what's going to keep this pump in place. It's also going to be a little spacer for that speedometer. There we go. Same both ways. Get the new retainer ring here as well. So there you go. You're gonna have both of them in there. Making sure that our surface is still good. There. That just pops into place. Next thing that's gonna go on is the rear yoke. And this one's gonna use one of these star washers with RTV before we actually put on the new rear nut. We're gonna let this cure for about 1 hour before we come back and torque everything down. I'll turn you guys back on when this is ready to go. Okay, so it's been about 2 hours since we RTV'd the case back together. The instructions on the gasket maker say wait about an hour before you start torquing down any bolts, and then give it about 24 hours of curing time before you add any fluid in there. So instructions say that these outer, the main bolts, they get torqued down to 20 to 25 foot-pounds, and these ones get torqued down to 15 to 20 pounds. So we're going to start in a crisscross order, and we'll work it from there. We're going to go 25 foot-pounds on these. Since we don't have a click style, this is a beam style torque wrench. It may be difficult to get some of this £20. Okay. It appears that socket, because it's an impact socket, that is a little bit thicker. Make sure we have spline engagement, or that we align the splines. And this is just going to go around. the new surface. And this is also gonna, well, this is the old yoke that was off the front. We're gonna retorque this whenever it's back in the vehicle. Now this needs to still cure, so we're not gonna be adding any ATF into it. Plus when we move it around we might spill some of that ATF when we're trying to juggle this whole piece in there. So now that we got most of it back together, we can go ahead and reinsert this the old speedometer gear and sensor, and we can more or less place the way we got it out. You can use the tabs on the alignment fork here to kind of reset everything back into place. And this is going to get torqued down. I believe this is a 10 millimeter.